Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Dan Gipple, and I'm a founder of a company called Better Points, and welcome to the webinar today. This is another webinar in the Green Transport Recovery series that has been put together by Landor Links Live, and we've got a very good size audience with us today, and we're very pleased you could join us. The topic today is about how to optimize outcomes from the Emergency Active Travel Fund. And if you're attending today, I'm sure you're all very, very aware about the Emergency Active Travel Fund. And we've already come a long way in terms of people making applications and having initial indications of funding. We're just about to enter into the second tranche in terms of bids going forward. So today what we're going to do is explore how local authorities can actually utilize funds to generate the most positive transport, health, and social outcomes. So to do that today, we've actually gathered a terrific panel of 4 experts that are going to each give a presentation to us. And I'd like to introduce who those individuals are right now. The first person we have with us is Richard Mace, who is the head of engagement and bikeability, active and accessible travel from the Department for Transport. Richard, thank you for joining us. We also have Kate Pangborn, who is a university academic fellow from the Institute of Transport Studies at the University of Leeds. Kate, thank you for joining us. We have Richard Kirk, the CEO of Better Points. Richard, thank you. And Jenny Wiggle, who is the interim CEO of Living Streets. And Jenny, thank you for being with us today. So our agenda is pretty straightforward. Each of our panelists is going to have the opportunity to present to us for 7 to 8 minutes and provide some of their thinking on how to optimize the outcomes. And during that period of time, if you're watching and listening, please feel free to use the question panel on the right-hand side of your screen to submit questions to either the individual panelists or the panel at large. And then after all 4 presentations are done, we will come back and utilize those questions for a question and answer session. So all of that being said, we'll get right into it. We don't have all that much time today. So I'd like to start right now by introducing Richard Mace from the Department for Transport to speak to us for a few minutes. Richard, over to you.
Thanks very much. Good morning, everyone. Yes, good morning. My name's Richard Mace. I'm from the Active Travel team in the Department for Transport. I'm here today to talk to you about Tranche 2, the Emergency Active Travel Fund, which, as you all know, is open for bidding right now, with bids required back on the 7th of August in 2 weeks' time. So I will talk you through some of the key aspects of the bid invitation that we sent out to you. The next slide, please. Okay. Right, so I was going to start just with a bit of a rewind on the policy context. So this all started on the 9th of May when £2 billion was announced for funding was announced for cycling and walking, and there are various components to that £2 billion. So this financial year there's £250 million of investment, and that's split into 2 components. First, there's £225 million for the Emergency Active Travel Fund, and that's Tranche 1. Authorities have received their payments of £45 million, and Tranche 2 is open for £180 million. And the other component there is the £25 million bike repair voucher scheme. And just a quick plug, we're expecting the Prime Minister to launch his long-term cycling and walking vision for in the next week or so. We don't have a precise date for that, but we're hoping that comes out very soon, and we're hoping that will be coupled with the bike repair voucher scheme as well. So that's all good news. Next slide, please. A brief word on the fund objectives. So this is all about really creating a road environment that's safer and provides greater capacity for both cyclists and pedestrians on the ground. So in the short term, it's about helping to relieve overcrowding and it's a difficult time on the ground out there for passengers, perhaps reduced capacity on public transport, on buses and trains. In the longer term, it's also about delivering the well-known benefits, longer term benefits for public health and environmental benefits around walking and cycling. The emphasis of the fund here is on good quality infrastructure and good design. We really want local authorities to promote measures which really help people get out their doors and make those walking trips to the shops to see other people in their communities. And also on the cycling side, some really good infrastructure provision that creates new cyclists and returning cyclists, maybe people who haven't been cycling for a number of years, to make cycling trips for shorter journeys. Have the next slide, please. So some more key features of the fund. I'm sure you're well aware that indicative allocation has been published on gov.uk for Tranche 2. There is a 80%, 20% capital and revenue split on the fund. And I'm just going to be clear about the revenue aspects of the fund. When the 20% allowance was made for revenue, that is primarily intended to support temporary infrastructure measures that can't be capitalised by authorities. So typically things like cones, wands, planters. However, we will consider bids for other complementary behaviour change measures should authorities feel that they can accommodate them within their indicative allocations. And these should be presented obviously as part of an integrated package that meets those overall objectives of the fund. As I said, the deadline for bids is very soon, in 2 weeks' time, on the 7th of August. Our ministers have set a very challenging deadline. So where possible, we've taken every opportunity to streamline the bid assessment process for authorities. So there is a light touch online proforma for authorities to fill in the smart survey format. And we appreciate the value for money assessment is the most time consuming aspect of the bid development process. So we have given authorities a longer time, should they require it, to prepare any value for money assessments. And those are only required for permanent schemes above £2 million. And also, if you have a permanent scheme above £2 million, we're asking for scheme drawings so we can have a look at the design aspects. Next slide, please. So finally, I'll just be very clear about what aspects are required by when on the fund, on the bidding process. So the main deadline is Friday, 7th of August, when we require the online bid performers to be submitted. And if you have a scheme above £2 million, permanent scheme above £2 million, then we were asking for a scheme drawing to be submitted as well, or maps of the scheme location. And then by Friday, the 11th of September, on value for money, so you have the choice of submitting your value for money assurance information either with your bid on Friday, 7th of August, or I would be absolutely clear, without penalty by Friday, 11th of September. So on the 11th of September deadline, if you're promoting permanent schemes above £2 million, then we will require a value for money assessment, which draws upon the Active Mode Appraisal Toolkit and the uplift tool that was sent to you with the bid invitation. If you're not promoting permanent schemes above £2 million, then all we will require from you is a letter of assurance from your Chief Finance Officer confirming that your schemes represent value for money. Just going back to the more comprehensive VFM assessment, that is recommended if you have other significant schemes for which you can cover, which you can capture tangible value for money benefits, then it is worth your while completing an assessment as well. But otherwise, and without penalty, we will just require a letter from your Chief Finance Officer. Next slide, please. And then finally, just any further questions, please get in touch. Our email address is there for the active travel team, walkingcycling@dft.gov.uk. We are receiving lots of individual queries from local authorities as to how best to frame their bids. We're very happy to answer those queries and have been doing so. And then finally, just a plug for our Basecamp best practice sharing forum. That was originally started from the LSWIP program for infrastructure planning, but there are now dedicated threads on there for the Emergency Active Travel Fund too. So if you're interested in joining that, there's I think there's over 400 individuals on that forum now, all sharing best practice. So just drop us a line at that email address, and we'll give you a log on if you're from a local authority to that site too. So that was it from me. Thanks very much.
Richard, thank you very much for that. And there's a number of questions pouring in as a result of your presentation that we'll come to in a bit, but thank you very much. At this point, I'd like to turn over to Kate Pangborn from the Institute of Transport Studies at the University of Leeds. Kate, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dan, and thank you to Richard. That was a great sort of summary of next steps for people to take. I'm really pleased to be here today, so thank you for the invitation. I'm here to talk a little bit about some research findings about targeting messaging around walking and cycling, which is not tried very much in transport. So it seems to me that communication regarding the continuing and increasing importance of active travel needs to be an essential element of some of these projects going forward. So next slide, please. Thank you. This is a rather complicated diagram, but we don't have an awful lot of time, so I'm just going to jump straight in with an attempt to explain our exploratory experiments, which were investigating the persuasiveness of messages that were looking to promote walking and cycling. This diagram it attempts to illustrate our hypothetical model of potential determinants of persuasiveness for messages. This one is for the cycling experiment. For walking, we didn't ask about cycling confidence, obviously, or indeed we didn't ask about walking confidence either. We rather took that for granted. But the key takeaway that I want people to bear in mind as I go through this is that our experimental findings for both walking and cycling indicate that the effectiveness of persuasive messages can be improved by a more fine-grained profiling of your potential persuadees. And just to go over that, what we thought would predict persuasiveness was a travel attitude segmentation based on the work of Gillian Annabel, potential for personality traits to have an impact, demographics that are more typically used, such as age and gender, and people's current main mode of transport, and in the case of cycling, whether they are confident cyclists or not. And then in terms of the message itself, what we were interested in is what the message or argument, if you like, appeals to. So whether it's appealing to a health reason, a financial reason, an environmental reason, or that something is convenient. And there's also different ways of expressing your arguments. From behaviour change, people might be familiar with the concept of people wanting to compare themselves to others or conform with social norms. So something described here as an ad populum argument would broadly translate to being the typical argument that, say, 80% of people agree that cycling is a healthy thing to do, would be an example. An authority example would be that scientists have shown that cycling is a healthy thing to do, or could extend your life by, say, 5 years, for example. Consequences could be positive consequences of cycling or negative consequences. And a practical inference is basically, if you want to get healthy, cycling is a good way to do that. And these were all the potential determinants for how persuasive our participants would find an argument. Next slide, please. So When we did the walking experiment, you see here I've got some lines and circles drawn on top of the diagram. We found basically that travel attitude didn't predict the persuasiveness of an argument. We were quite surprised by that. We were expecting it. We did find that personality traits, certain ones, did predict how persuasive people would find arguments. Convenience as a value was not persuasive at all. Ad populum arguments weren't persuasive. Consequence arguments weren't persuasive. And I've put a cross through cycling confidence here because this is the walking results. What came out top, not very surprising, I don't think, is that a health message is quite persuasive, a lot more persuasive than both financial and environmental, but they were all more persuasive than convenience as a reason to cycle. Individual combinations of personality traits do seem to be highly relevant for predicting how persuasive they might find a message in a behavioural campaign. For example, people who are very high in conscientiousness will generally find all messages more persuasive than those who are low in conscientiousness. And for promoting walking, if you want to focus on environmental reasons, our findings suggest that you should target those to people who are higher in the trait of agreeableness. In relation to demographics, 30 to 39-year-olds were most receptive to health messages, but everybody is more persuaded by health in general. For those under 40, financial benefits had more persuasiveness than for those over 40. Next slide, please. I should add that both our samples were heavily biased towards younger age groups because we did the surveys through Amazon Mechanical Turk. Okay, so this is the cycling equivalent. You can see I've crossed out fewer things here. I'm not 100% sure of the role of cycling confidence at the moment because the analysis of that data is still ongoing. But again, we found that travel attitude didn't have a strong impact. Age and gender, surprisingly, didn't have a very strong impact in this particular experiment. But we're not, it was an exploratory experiment. So if we wanted to be sure about that, we'd have to design another experiment that has fewer variables to focus on specific hypotheses. Okay, so again, convenience is not really a very effective argument value, and it's particularly not effective for people who are not regular cyclists. So trying to persuade potential new cyclists or returning cyclists that cycling is actually convenient is not going to be an easy thing to do. You shouldn't expect success from that strategy. Again, health arguments are generally persuasive, but very interestingly, people who walk as their main mode are less persuaded by that than both cyclists and car users. And we think that's because people believe that walking already confers significant health benefits and they wouldn't be improving health benefits by taking up cycling for their short journeys. Again, personality was very important. With cycling, we found that people who are high in extroversion generally found all arguments more persuasive. And the trait of being open to experience was related to ratings of both health and convenience messages. For example, those who are low in openness are generally less persuaded by health-related messages as a reason to cycle. And those who are mid in openness, who you might regard as being quite balanced in their acceptance of information, are in fact more persuaded by convenience compared to anybody else. But again, I do want to emphasize that it's not a persuasive argument strategy to focus on convenience. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. It's probably important to understand what happens when you combine different values in one message, because that's more like real life communications. And so for this experiment, we combined 4 different values: environment, finance, convenience, and community, with a health-related message within one. And we did it in several different ways. So it could either be environment followed by health, or health followed by one of the other values, or they could be nested one within the other. It's a sort of grammatical strategy. We found that the grammatical strategy had no effect on persuasiveness. And we found that combining an environmental or financial message with a health message made it generally more persuasive than convenience or community messages. But the good news is that combining any of these with a health-related message improved their persuasiveness across the board. So nothing was made worse. I think that's the main thing to take away from that. Again, we found personality traits were implicated. Again, those who are higher in extroversion were more likely to be convinced by arguments in general. They were also more likely to be persuaded by community-focused messages, so promoting the community benefits of active travel would be very welcomed by people who are high in extroversion. And those who are more agreeable are more persuaded by financial arguments. Again, so the other attributes didn't seem to make a big difference. Next slide, please. One of the things that we're quite concerned about, I think generally, is what's going to happen to bus travel. For example, in Scotland, using public transport in Scotland is seen as a part of active travel because of the increased walking that people do to access the mode. I live in Scotland, so that's why I mention that. However, across the board, COVID-19 is posing a really significant challenge to bus travel, in part due to government advice, but also to public confidence about being out in public. And we're already seeing that car use is back to 2/3 of its pre-lockdown levels. Next slide, please. So what we have done that might contribute to restoring some confidence in bus use, getting people back on the bus, is another similar experiment investigating persuasive messages for encouraging bus use. I have to stress that this analysis is very preliminary. We haven't finished it. But what we seem to find is that, rather unsurprisingly, regular bus users are more persuaded by bus use arguments than car users or cyclists, but not walkers. Walkers are similar to regular bus users. However, they don't seem to have any particular preference for the value that's argued for based on their bus use. However, it is important for bus use. Environmental arguments are most persuasive here, interestingly, which is quite different to walking and cycling. And financial arguments were the second best. Convenience was less persuasive, but the least persuasive was health-related messages. In this experiment, we found that argument type did seem to make a difference for health and convenience, and that the ad populum health arguments were generally not a persuasive strategy, but authority and consequence did seem to boost the persuasiveness of convenience arguments. So if you do want to promote convenience as a reason to use the bus, try to express it as an authority or a consequence argument. Being high in agreeableness was a significant factor for the persuasiveness of environmental arguments. However, geography matters. We had some spatial data in this experiment, and this is rather interesting. We found that there was a general trend that as the deprivation level of a participant's residential area decreased, the persuasiveness of arguments for bus use also decreases, except for those who live in the 4th quintile. So that's between 60 and 80% of the least deprived areas. They rated bus use arguments as almost equally persuasive of those in the bottom 2 quintiles. But further analysis of that data is ongoing, and we're trying to relate it to market research data to try and understand that. We think there's sort of a particular category of urbanites. Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you very much for that. My mind is kind of reeling from all the potential ways that everything you just said could talk about how to communicate things to different target audiences and messaging. And you've got a lot of questions built up here on the question panel as well, so we'll come back to that. I'd like to move on now to Richard Kirk, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Better Points, who will talk a little bit more, but with a particular aim towards behavior change, I believe. Richard, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dan. Hello, everybody. I'm Richard Kirk. I'm the CEO of Better Points. And next slide, please. As Richard Mace has just said, the Emergency Travel Fund is made up of those two components, Tranche 1 and Tranche 2. And the Tranche 2 of the 180 million is temporary and permanent schemes with a 2-week deadline from today. The objectives, as clearly laid out already, are to help local authorities implement measures to create an environment that is safe for walking and cycling, both walking and cycling. I think the emphasis has to be clear on that. Next slide, please, Mark. Infrastructures alone, however, will not work. So here we see a cycle pathway with no bikes on it, and that is a bit unfair because this one is used a lot, but it's to emphasize the point that things need people. This is the hard and the soft, and people need to know about those things and therefore to be able to change their behavior. And I'm just going to read this out unashamedly. This is, as Richard has said, DFT will consider bids for other complementary behavior change measures should authorities feel they can accommodate them within their individual allocations. These must be presented as part of an integrated package that meets the fund objectives. And this is really saying that behavior change has a great place in here beyond the hard infrastructure. Next slide, please. We've been doing this for a long time at Better Points, since 2010, and we do this with our app and our platform, and I'll come on to that very briefly. But we bring everything alive, and we're locking in this positive post-COVID behavior. As Kate said, cars are returning, but I think that's a temporary thing before we can move people across back to public transport. But we head, as always, towards this net zero behavior. Next slide, please. With the Better Points program, we have 4 components. And these are shown here: gamification, tracking, rewards, and messaging. Just going through those very quickly. We track activity, mode of transport, through GPS on the app. So each user can track their walking, their running, their cycling, later public transport on the app, and it will show the distance, the times, the CO2 used through the app. The platform determines the parameters that people are measured on and the times that they can earn points on. The gamification is where people can earn medals, which have no monetary value, but have a great psychological build-up value. They can earn better points, or they can earn better tickets, where those goes into a draw. And that brings us on to the rewards, where those can be exchanged for vouchers or given to charity, or exchanged where these arrangements are set up with local retailers for coffee, etc. And messaging. The messaging is absolutely key. And messaging allows all our clients to be able to communicate what is going on. I'll show you this in a moment, what is going on within their area, and goes beyond just the program. It can cover anything at all. Next slide, please, Mark. This is an example in Leicestershire. I'm just going to go through this. Leicester City and Leicestershire County Councils had just started their 3rd year of Better Points support for the Choose How You Move program when the COVID-19 crisis came in. And they reacted very quickly by switching from mode of transport measurement to encouraging citizens to get active at home, to be kind and to connect with others, and to try something new and share their lockdown stories. Then we emerged into the new world of social distance travel. Leicester was quick off the mark to give residents the opportunity to cycle or walk safely in and around the city. Building on the success of temporary cycle lanes to help key workers reach Leicester Royal Infirmary during the lockdown, Leicester City Council pledged to roll out a mile a week of temporary cycle and walking infrastructure for 10 weeks. Their Better Points program once again adapted rapidly to support this evolution. And working in partnership with Leicester, we put in a pop-up challenge, which included geo-fenced pop-up routes to track and reward residents who use them with prize draw tickets. We celebrated the use of the pop-up lanes and widened footpaths by sharing stories. So people could share stories of how they've helped residents get back on their feet or on two wheels. And this is a regular feature which allows the storyteller to earn 25,000 better points and the accolade of being that month's pop-up star. Users can share their story directly through the Better Points app. We also had top of the POPs medals that are earned by regular use of the temporary infrastructure, including our Pop to the Shops and Top of the Pops Don't Stop. That's in addition, of course, to notifications and in-app alerts to all users who live in and around Leicester to encourage them to use the pop-up lanes. And people can go through these stories and see a longer story, which gives them detail of those lanes locations and explains the rewards and how to earn them. Then as the campaign evolved, other things were introduced and are being introduced, like real-time messages for when people get near the routes to alert them to the fact that they're in the vicinity. Targeting people who live near to cycle lanes with more focused messaging using postcode data. Giving users the ability to create their own pop-up team and work towards a charitable goal by traveling by bike or on foot, and allowing also people to join their neighborhood team and compete against each other to cover the most distance using pop-up infrastructure. Better Points has provided content to support Leicester's transport strategy team to reach out to their networks to promote the challenge and to help to collect as much data as possible about the use of the new infrastructure. This includes Leicester Bike Aid, Wheels to Work, and a range of local cycle shops and centres. The benefits that can be realised by people tracking their journeys on the pop-up lanes and sharing their data via the Better Points app include real-time, hyperlocal heat map visualizations to show frequency and time of use. Insight into demographics of people using the lanes as well as those who don't. Direct engagement with users at the time of travel to ask for feedback on lanes, their sense of safety, whether they are sufficient and should be made permanent. And these insights can help Leicester to make planning decisions about which lanes to make permanent and where new infrastructure may be needed. Overall, to build a future of cleaner air, less congestion, and a safer way for residents to walk and cycle in the city. Next slide, please, Mark. Making the budget work beyond infrastructure is obviously important. There are health benefits, travel mode shifts, and improvements to journey quality. But we have to look here, I think, particularly important with the emergency fund to the benefit cost ratio. Public Health England have published quite extensively the fact that physical inactivity creates 1 in 6 deaths in the UK at a cost on the broader business and public sectors of £7.4 billion per year. We know that air pollution costs 5.3 billion, or will do by 2035, unless we do something about that. 30% of all adults in the UK are inactive, so that contributes to that physical inactivity. There are so many figures that we can add here, so the cost benefit ratio is not difficult to calculate, and this is something that we automatically do with our post program analysis. Next slide, please. There's the ability to introduce incentivized positive behavior change to programs right now. We do out-of-the-box solutions or bespoke programs. There are 2 weeks left in Tranche 2 submissions, and 20% of that, as we've already said, can be used for integrated packages. So we wouldn't take up 20% of that. We are part of a series of solutions that can go into this. So that was the unashamed commercial pitch. We would like everything to go from where we are now with COVID-19 and obviously go back to better, and we hope that Better Points can be a part of that and your future plans. Thank you very much.
Richard, thank you very much for that. and there's a number of questions coming in, particularly on the Leicester situation we can come back to later. For our fourth presentation, I'd actually like to move now to Jenny Wiggle, who is the interim CEO of the UK national walking charity Living Streets. Jenny, over to you.
Thank you, Dan. Good morning, everyone. I'm Jenny Wiggle. I'm the interim CEO of Living Streets. Living Streets, for those who don't know, is the UK charity for everyday walking. We advocate for better streets and encourage people to walk more. And we have staff embedded in a number of local authorities across the UK supporting walking initiatives locally. Next slide, please. The Emergency Active Travel Fund is a key priority, and we push for it through our engagement with DfT, and we're delighted to see local authorities coming forward with ambitious schemes. We're well aware of the pressure that local authority officers are under and the difficulties that you're operating in, and we'd like to thank you against this backdrop for all the work that you're doing at present. We're also too aware of the challenges in ensuring schemes tackle inequalities and deliver benefits for both walking and cycling, and go beyond a cycle lane or a pavement widening scheme, and also of the public voices that are already coming out against schemes. Today I want to focus on three areas: tackling inequalities, ensuring benefits for both walking and cycling, including accessibility and door-to-door journey needs, and enabling positive voice. DfT is seeking ambitious schemes. By keeping these elements in mind, we have the opportunity to be truly ambitious and life-changing for so many people in our towns and cities. Next slide, please. Tackling inequalities should be front of mind when we're planning improvements to our streets. COVID-19 has exacerbated differences. We all experienced lockdown, but we did not all experience it equally. The DfT's COVID-19 travel tracker shows how much many more of us walked and cycled during lockdown, but there continues to be big inequalities in physical activity levels. The most recent Sport England Activity Lives report survey shows that older adults remain less active than young adults. People from lower socioeconomic groups, people with a disability or long-term health conditions, and Black and Asian adults all remain less likely to be active. The unequal impacts of COVID-19 across our communities is well documented, and BAME and low-income groups are far more likely to suffer from the effects of poor equality as well, which further exacerbates these impacts. So what does this all mean for walking environments? Well, it really highlights to us the need for improvements to the walking environment to be spread across all of our communities, not just high streets and leafy suburbs. And it reminds us of the need not to forget to deal with our main roads. Next slide, please. COVID-19 has highlighted the need for more space for physical distance, especially on the high street. Narrow and inadequate pavements are not a new problem. It's just something more of us are now noticing. Next slide, please. In Tranche 1, many towns and cities started to close off their streets to traffic or introduce pavement widening. Next slide, please. For Tranche 2, DfT been explicit about the need to ensure the Emergency Active Travel Fund schemes benefit both walking and cycling, and for us this very clearly points to two things: low traffic neighbourhoods and ensuring the safety of the walk to school as our children return in the autumn, combining school streets with other interventions such as low traffic neighbourhoods, better crossings, 20-mile-per-hour zones, all of which have been encouraged by the DfT. Next slide, please. Walking is so central to this because walking is part of every journey, whether it's to the station, the bus stop, shops, amenities, or to school. And as we move forward with our COVID recovery, it's important we're enabling as many journeys as possible to be active and sustainable. Public transport will be key to this in the longer term as people begin to feel more confident travelling on bus and train. And we mustn't forget that almost 25% of UK households don't own a car and rely on public transport for their longer journeys. Plans need to seamlessly combine the capital and the revenue spending and ensure that the revenue side is spent wisely. They also need to have good consultation to ensure accessibility needs are met within an integrated network. Next slide, please. Cycling and walking schemes deliver fantastic value for money, typically producing returns of £4 to £19 for every pound spent, compared to road building, which typically returns 3 to 5. And such investment leads directly to cleaner, healthier, safer communities. But why are these rates of return so high? Well, it's because walking and cycling deliver such high health benefits, have zero emissions, and reduce vehicle numbers on the roads. Next slide, please. There are really good reasons to be moving forward with schemes to encourage walking and cycling in the current environment. And we need to ensure that people who would really benefit from positive changes are able to speak up. But at the moment, we're hearing too much from the naysayers, which is being reflected in many places in the postbags and the email boxes of our elected members. Next slide, please. There is mounting evidence showing people want change. A new YouGov survey was released yesterday showing that the British public strongly support changing our streets to reduce the dominance of motor traffic and to support walking and cycling. There is support for making these changes, even amongst people who personally would not change their own travel behaviour. For every person opposed to changes in the local areas, there are as many as 6.5 people who support those changes. This survey shows that opposition to active travel schemes does not reflect the views of the majority. We need to listen to what the majority wants now, and we need to empower them to express their views. Next slide, please. There's a risk that the negative voices will dominate though, and we're hearing a lot from drivers, retailers, emergency services and others, some with understandable concerns and others less so. Next slide. Oh, sorry, back. Drivers are concerned about disruption to their journey times, though the reality is that too much of our space has been given to the private car for too long. Delivery firms are worried about delivery time, but many local authorities are working positively with them already on this. Emergency services are concerned too, but there's evidence that shows that with new schemes, fire response time goes down and antisocial behaviour falls. And retail are concerned about impact on sales, but lots of businesses are supportive too. For example, an online survey found that 90% of businesses in Sandwich support the temporary road closures put in place to help springboard shops back to life. Next slide, please. What is often misunderstood is that foot traffic delivers economic vitality too. High streets and town centres need to be walkable and accessible with a diverse mix of services in order to thrive. Our pedestrian pound research cites that improved streets experience a 20 to 35% boost in footfall, and sales from retail can increase by 30%. Retailers overestimate the extent to which customers drive and the importance of parking, yet people who walk and cycle take more trips to the local town centre per month than those coming in by car. Shoppers are more concerned by a range of shops and the attractiveness of the environment. It's about the experience. Next slide, please. There was lots of positivity and kindness during the height of lockdown, and we should be looking to that, nurturing it and building on it, and looking for the silent majority. What do they want? A survey commissioned by Global Action Plan in late May showed 69% of public, including those without children, wanted to see communities retain safer roads and fewer cars when lockdown eases. And 6 out of 10 parents were worried about increased levels of traffic. Next slide, please. At Living Streets, we've been working with local authorities and others to create a positive story around the changes that would benefit us all. Our Walking From Home series profiles different stories and positive ways in which people have benefited from the simple act of walking and the need to change our streets to boost it further. Next slide, please. The key for us is how do you give local communities the power to speak out? This is a combination of showing them how their streets could be better through community street audits and case studies, enabling positive communication, and helping those who could really benefit, particularly families, young children, the elderly, and those who are most vulnerable on our busy streets, to tell their stories about the positive impact of change. Next slide, please. We need to be mindful not only to make the improvements where good schemes are in place for the quick wins, but be ambitious to improve our streets and neighbourhoods, giving priority to areas of greatest need. By ensuring attractive, effective and accessible connectivity to public transport, we will enable people to make the switch to taking active and sustainable journeys. Next slide, please. Thank you.
Oh, turn the mute off, that works better. Jenny, thank you very, very much for that. And there are, again, a lot of number of questions coming in. So I think we're there in terms of all 4 presentations, and from what I can tell, we're pretty much right on time. We've got about a half hour left to actually address some questions to the panelists. So I'm actually going to start this by asking all of the panelists if they can actually put their video back on so we can see everybody. And if you can remain on mute until you're going to answer something. Now, some of the questions here are actually directed to specific panelists. Others are more general in nature. So we're going to kick this off. Richard Mace, there are a number of questions up front, as you might imagine, that are actually, some of them are broad, but some of them are very, very specific about the applications and what counts and what doesn't count. So we'll run through a few of these. And the first question that came in was, are there specific measures funding to ensure that infrastructure is accessible for those with additional needs and disabilities, who may be using adapted non-standard cycles?
Yeah, so obviously I think the important thing is for local authorities to design these schemes that meets the needs of all the travelling public on all different walks of local communities. In the application process, we're asking bidders to set out how they're consulting with community groups in the delivery of their bids. A key aspect of that is obviously local authorities' own public sector equality duty, and particularly for these schemes, the need to meet the needs of disabled groups as well. I mentioned good quality design aspects. So when thinking about the design and configuration of your schemes, you should be thinking about provision to enable things like adaptive bikes for disabled groups. And if you need more advice on that, speak to the leading groups like Wheels for Wellbeing and other experts to find out how you can best configure your bids to meet those kinds of needs.
Richard, thank you. There's another one here in terms of there is a council area, I think it's Essex. They have several towns. Should each town be considered as one package, e.g. 2 million, and therefore are they assessed as separate packages? Is each town a separate package?
We're leaving it to local authorities to make the call as to how best to configure their bids. For an area like Essex that might have a collection of market towns, then it would make sense to split each of those up into package bids with a series of interventions at each location. Other way you can do it is, well, we set out a definition of a scheme in the bid invitation. So that could be a corridor scheme with a series of interventions, or it could be an area-wide package, thematic bid, for example, a package of school streets that you might want to promote in a series of locations in your local authority area. But that would be fine to split it up at town level.
And there's a couple of questions around the issue of what could be considered for the revenue element. I know you covered part of that earlier, but one point came in, there's lots of verges that have become overgrown and narrowed paths. Would cutting that back be allowed as a revenue action to widen roads? And there was a second point on could personal travel planning be included in the revenue element?
I would say yes to both. So on verge vegetation clearance, if you need that to enable your bid to be realised on the ground, that would be fine. Just obviously with appreciation that there's an ongoing revenue maintenance need for that, which we can't fund over a longer term. Sorry, what was the second question?
The second one had to do with personal travel planning. Could
yes,
that be?
Yeah. Again, that would be acceptable as long as the measures that you are considering are to promote the infrastructure measures that you are bidding for in your package. So we have a small amount of revenue in the fund to be able to support the actual infrastructure measures you're bidding for. I think what I would say is this is probably not the fund to bid for a large-scale local communications program for active travel covering a much broader space. I think we'd probably be looking to successor funds and the remainder of the £2 billion funding for those types of measures, obviously which is being considered in the forthcoming spending review.
Okay. Richard, thank you very much. Kate, there were a number of issues around your study that came up, some comments and some questions. One of the questions came in, were there specific reasons given for cycling in regions or nations with high cycling mode share?
Sorry, can you repeat that, Dan? I didn't quite catch it.
Yes. So where the study actually looked at regions or nations that had a high cycling mode share, were there specific reasons for that appeared?
We didn't look, well, when we recruited our participants, we didn't stratify by where they were. It was a convenience sample. So because it was an exploratory study, we were trying to sort of prove whether or not personality traits and other things were candidates. So further research is needed to actually understand the spatial aspects of that, because obviously there's a strong spatial element in what people are likely to find even possible, and that will affect whether they find messages persuasive. So yeah, it's a very relevant question, but I haven't got the answer yet.
Okay, there was a couple of questions around that as to where advertising in a certain region had been the lead reason for the mode shift, but I think that's probably related to the answer you just gave. In terms of you had to further. One point that I found interesting that came up was the issue of walking confidence. Was walking confidence covered in your study at all? And the point that was made was that people are not always confident to walk, etc. So was that something that was actually covered at all in your findings?
It actually wasn't, and it's only with hindsight that we have realised that perhaps it was a relevant question from having asked that question as part of the cycling study. And yes, this is one of the drawbacks of every study, is that you think of what you should have included afterwards, because I do think that actually is a very underlooked at element. So yeah, hopefully we will be able to include aspects of that in future.
And Kate, were there cohorts in the study of older people? Not
enough. Yeah, it was too biased towards younger people because of the way that we recruited our participants. So we are a little bit cautious about some of the age-related findings in there. And we would like to have a more even spread of age groups so that they're more representative.
Okay. Kate, I'll come back on a couple more questions. Let's spread it around a little bit.
Okay.
Richard Kirk has some specific questions around Leicester in terms of how many app users were there actually in Leicester, and some people have asked in terms of range of magnitude about how costly Better Points programs are.
Right. Okay. Let me take the first one first. The actual numbers in the Leicestershire program, I don't think that's my information to share, unfortunately, but so I can talk in general terms. A program like this will have about 2,000 to 4,000 participants, but mainly dictated by the pace of the client. So the client will say, these are the people they want to reach. And that can be through our marketing or through the client's marketing. Many clients will say, we'll do all the engagement. We can introduce things like we have done with Leicestershire, which is targeting people, real-time messaging. And in the case of Leicester, the numbers are growing because of the reach now to the enormous reach to the cyclists on the pop-up scheme. So numbers can be determined according to each client, but 2,000 to 4,000 or 5,000 is an indicator. As far as the range of magnitude of cost is concerned, we can at the moment we could pop in a Better Points proposal into a bid as part of a series of options into an integrated package between 15 to 50,000. It depends on the program. We're certainly not using all that 20%. These are very, very cost-effective programs that can go in and encourage people to change their behavior permanently, and to measure afterwards what the results are on those people and on the infrastructure that's been put in place. So very, very cost-effective.
Hey, Richard, just stay with that. You obviously talked about the benefits of the app in the presentation. Does the data, does the Better Points data support the idea that health is the crucial factor in influencing active travel behavior, or do you think it's the other factors, rewards, gamification, etc., that are more important?
I think that health is a very key factor, and I think Kate's research bore that out. this is a combination, and we're getting into all sorts of theories of motivation here, but just stick with the health for the time being. Within the app, users can see exactly how much exercise they're doing, how many minutes, so they can see if they're exceeding the 150 minutes per week recommended by Public Health England, and they can challenge themselves very much, either individually or by leagues if they're competing with other people. As far as the rewards are concerned, this again goes back to, I think, to Kate's research, which is some people are very influenced by being motivated. So you fall into the 20, in my view, 20-60-20, whereas 20% of people will be self-motivated, whatever you ask them to do. 60% are the ones that you can influence and change the behavior, and then you've got 20% it doesn't matter what you do with them, they're not going to change anything. But you know, that's broadly the parameters that we would use to influence that behavior.
Thank you, Richard. And Jenny, let me move to you for a couple of the questions that have come in. First of all, there was a question, you referred to a survey in your study, and there was just a question as to what survey you were actually referring to, if you can recall.
I referred to a couple of surveys. Is there anything more specific on that? Let me just take a look. So the Sport England, it might be the Sport England Active Live survey.
Okay.
So Sport England were doing an active live survey through specifically through lockdown and releasing data. It might be that survey.
Okay. Well, we will be providing links to the presentations after that, so I'm sure we can come back with a specific answer. But on a wider level, Jenny, has any work been done with local businesses with regarding the negative impact on high streets? I mean, are you finding that councillor views regarding the negative impact on high streets is often enough to stop a scheme moving forward? In terms of any, local business or local councillor views, what kind of resistance have you found working in towns on trying to get schemes moving forward?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I would direct the person who's asked the question to take a look at Pedestrian Pound for evidence of where retailers and the uptake has been positive, because as I said in the presentation, retailers do overestimate. The private motor vehicle's been very powerfully marketed at us as the essential tool for a very long time, and so the idea that you have to drive somewhere for retail and for economy is a message that retailers have as well. But when you look at some of the findings in Pedestrian Pound, I didn't go through in details the examples that we have there, but Oxford Street, for example, when the diagonal crossings was put in, that lifted retail through that area because there was increased footfall of people being able to move through and into it, and the retailers were supportive of it. A lot of retailers are supportive of making that area more pedestrianised. There's an example in the Pedestrian Pound where there was 20% uptake in a parklet being put outside a place in Shoreditch. 20% uptake because the parklet's there, so there's more people around, more people wanting to stay in the area as opposed to having a parking space in there. You add that up quite quickly as a retailer and decide what you want outside the front of your shop. So I would direct them to have a look at Pedestrian Pound. It is very easily findable on the Living Streets website. So just Google Pedestrian Pound Living Streets and you'll find a link to that document.
Very good, thank you, Jenny. There was one other question in terms of Kate had provided a view in terms of the top messaging that could be provided to persuade people. From the experience of Living Streets, how would your experience echo that? What would you believe are the top messaging to persuade the general public to move towards active travel, to walking and cycling, particularly walking?
What's quite interesting is hearing the speakers before me, and particularly Kate's presentation, when there was a lot of talk about health and well-being, and particularly following what we've experienced in the lockdown, health and well-being has been a huge message. The walking was escalated into the forefront of people's mind during lockdown, because it became the one thing when we were all locked into and shut down into our houses. It was that one thing that you could get out and you could do on a daily basis. And you were given permission to do it, and it became this absolutely precious thing as people walked out of their houses and realised how good it was for their mental well-being, how physically they felt better, and people wanted to walk more. And from that, people were then, we've got the evidence of people getting out on their bikes more, and the families, the uptake there was in purchasing cycles and all of that. But it was the walking that really came through for people, and it was physically being able to move, and it was the mental health as well. So there's those two aspects that really go hand in hand, and we find that that's messaging is what really rings true with people. Whether you're talking about, when you're talking about air quality, if you start talking about air quality around a school and pollution for children and young families, that's the message people want. When you say if people are walking to school and they're travelling actively to school, the air pollution around the school area drops, and you've got cleaner air, that makes sense. That's about the health and well-being of our children, our older people, making it so that pavements are wide, are smooth, that people aren't dealing with clutter, they're not trying to get around trips and falls that can happen on pavements. All of these things are about our health and well-being, and that just makes sense. So that is a really important message. And it is also about the enjoyment. So when we talk about health and well-being, let's make sure we're not just talking about physical, but we're talking about the mental and the feeling better, but also enjoying and getting out and spending time. We had a fantastic quote that a parent said to me once, saying that the walk to school was the most precious time of the day that they had with their children, because it was the one time of the day that they weren't distracted by something else, and they were able to speak with their child, and they said they found out more about their child's day on the walk to and from school than at any other point in their day with their child. Now that's an incredibly precious part of walking that we've got to remember as well.
That's outstanding. Thank you, Jenny. There are a number of questions that are simply open to any of the panelists. So for the moment, I think I'd like to go to some of those. There's a very interesting comment here. As well as the positive uptake in walking and cycling, there's been an increase in dangerous driving, speeding, etc. And this is one of the key deterrents to new and returning riders. There is little police enforcement or messaging about good driving standards. How can this be tackled? So I just want to open it up to the panel. Whoever would like to join into that, please.
Can I mention, oh, sorry, yeah, you go, Kate. I was just going to mention very, very quickly that there is work going on looking at the highway code, and Richard may want to mention that, but there has been work going on looking at the highway code, and I think that's an important area that we need to look at in terms of actually putting the safety and how our rules and our legislation around our roads actually protects the people who are the most vulnerable road users. So that's the point I'd make there.
Thanks, Jenny. Kate?
Yeah, I was going to say that I think messaging does have a role here, in having a general campaign that just reminds drivers of their responsibilities. And there are hard to reach categories, subgroups within the driving population who are probably the main culprits here. This is a slight sweeping generalization, but this is not particularly my area. I would say in terms of their attitude segmentation, they probably fall into the devoted driver category. And in our findings, we found when we looked within the segment categories for the distribution of personality traits, this was the particular segment that had a disproportionate number of the hard to persuade personality traits, which does make them particularly intransigent, but messaging needs to be part of it, and just making it downright unacceptable.
Okay. Any other thoughts on this one?
Yeah, just from the Department for Transport. So as part of the package we're hoping will be announced in the next week or so, I've been working a lot behind the scenes in reviewing the highway code, particularly on rebalancing the penalties for all road users, particularly around motorists, and giving greater protection to pedestrians and cyclists. I'm not close to that one, but look out for that in the coming week. I think that will be there'll be some major progress on that. Also, the department's been working with the Bikeability Trust. Key to this is education of all road groups. We've been particularly putting together some materials targeted at driving instructors who obviously propagate the behaviours of drivers throughout their kind of motoring lives. So we've put together, well, we're preparing a package of online training tools for instructors to show to learner drivers as they are learning how to drive and operate a vehicle, so they can be more aware of the behaviours of cyclists, particularly on the road. And we'll also be piloting and evaluating some practical cycle training for driving instructors, to give them a first-hand experience of what it feels like to be a cyclist on the road, and how to adapt one's behaviour when behind the wheel of a vehicle. So that's some interesting work which is currently in the pipeline.
Very good. Very good. Richard, yes, please.
Yeah, this is outside our remits, controlling speed, but I think we've all noticed this increase of dangerous driving, which is very, very annoying, to say the least. As Kate said, the type of user that we will get will probably not be using a Better Points app, because they're just going to drive and drive and drive. But what we can do, and I think if it makes any contribution, we can add next week a message to all our users about dangerous driving and about encouraging people not to. I'm not saying go and have a word with people, because that would create all sorts of other problems. But just to say that there's an increase in dangerous driving, and let's all suppress it. So we can do that as Better Points next week.
Very good. There's actually a couple questions that kind of dovetail together I'd like to address to everybody. One is from a councillor in Peacehaven, East Sussex, which is part of a 20,000 person population of a commuter town that's designed around the car. And this is similar to many different urban areas that have been developed around the 50 years. So I think the question involved here is really about, how do you tackle that situation? And the other question I'd like to tie to that is a question, can any of you give good examples of areas where it is largely a car area that has successfully moved to active transport? So I'd just like to open up that double-barreled question to the panel. Yes,
I'll fire away very quickly on that, and it's obviously a very big question. If you've got a commuter town, and it depends what that commuter town is, very often there is the ability for people to take up active travel where there is no real infrastructure for public transport. People can in fact walk to those public transport points more readily than they think. And I'm thinking of my own situation. I'm at least 2 miles away from anything at all, but I do walk if I'm going to take public transport, not at the moment. I think as we come out of COVID as well, we will be able to go more into encouraging people to car share, which is on the increase, and we will see different modes of transport come in as we come out of COVID as well. So I would encourage all those people to one, walk more, to car share later, and to take public transport more. Without the specifics, that's a very general question, very general answer, but others may have better views on this.
Yeah, so chip in. So I think you'll see more on this subject within the next week in the Prime Minister's vision. So I won't go into detail on that. Indeed, I'm not particularly that close on the subject. Local cycling walking infrastructure plans, they are trailed in the National Planning Policy Framework. So for where an authority is promoting new developments, they should be taking account of any planned local cycling and walking infrastructure plans. So that's set out in national planning policy guidance. In terms of local communities, it's not really for me to promote particular areas. I think what's key is making sure that there's good quality of provision. So starting off with a popular spinal route in the local authority, that local area that people will use, and building out from there so people can get an experience and a good quality initial experience. Areas like Leicester, I mean, that's a much larger population, but they have been working to break down some of the old 50s style infrastructure, the concrete collar around Leicester, and break that down and open up their city to more road users, and particularly active travel users. So there are examples out there. Very good.
Kate, Jenny, comments?
Yeah, I was going to say a couple of things about this around some of the sort of older sort of suburban type developments and developments that were built in the 80s, for example, where they had sort of curvy streets and lots of cul-de-sacs, and they weren't very permeable for people who were on walking or cycling, and so looking at how some of these the sort of more direct walking and cycling routes could be opened up in some of those settings would be helpful. Obviously they need to be safe routes so that people don't feel unsafe because they're sort of not overlooked or they go behind things. That can be an issue. The work of an academic at the University of West of England has been very much on car-free development and creating car-free lifestyles. That's Steve Melia, M-E-L-I-A. You may find some of his work covers specific areas that have done good work. And there's also on LinkedIn, you can find quite a lot about how Amsterdam wasn't always the Amsterdam that we know now. And people often say in this country, oh, well, we can't do it here because we're not Amsterdam. Well, at one point, Amsterdam wasn't either. If you look at pictures of it in the 1970s, it's absolutely full of cars. And so we can actually look backwards at some of the sort of long-term sustained policy changes, because that's what it takes. It's not an overnight success story.
Understand. Jenny, thoughts?
Yeah, I'd like to pick up on that point, that last point that Kate made there. People do look across to the Dutch examples and say they've always been like that, but they made a decision and they moved in a direction and they kept going with that, and they made sure, you know, if you've cycled over there, or you know, they've got integrated between towns and cities, so it is actually a sustained move away from something. And it is, I think possibly the question, I'm going to make an assumption that the question was asking not just about the examples that we might have in urban areas, because I think there's a lot in the centre of towns and cities where we can point to where these changes, you know, I'm thinking of things like the mini Holland schemes, and there's lots of great results and statistics have come out from the Waltham Forest scheme, for example, where there was some resistance, but actually overwhelmingly it's been really positive. But I think possibly the person's asking about, or the question's more steered when you get out of the towns and out of those big urban centres. And yes, that's a conversation I often have with people. There's a frustration that's happening in the urban centres, and we do need to be looking to our towns and making sure that the towns are able to make those changes as well. And we need to reallocate the road space in those town centres. There's two things we need to do. We need to reallocate the road space. It's too narrow on the footpaths for people to get around, and we also need to make sure that reallocation connects us to our public transport. Because people, if you don't have a way of getting somewhere, people are going to get in easily, people are going to get in cars. So as part of this recovery, prepare for that, so that as people are more confident to get on public transport, they'll get there and there will be ways for them to connect up and through. Examples of cities where it's made a big difference, and that Sheffield, with the connection from the train station coming up and through, and it's like a wonderful history walk that takes you up and through and into the town centre. That's increased footfall. Those type of connections, you've got the two things in separate places. So what we've got to do is start deciding to design to provide. So start with walking and cycling when we're thinking about our designs, not adding them on. And too often we see things from a walking perspective where there's not even a picture of a person walking around on foot. We've got cycles, we've got cars, whenever we talk about transport, we must put pedestrians in there as well if we're going to start to actually make that difference. The final point I want to make is that there's the decarbonisation plan and workshops coming out from DFT, and this is one of the points that we've been putting forward, is saying that we've got to stop having these type of towns where everyone has to drive to be able to access them. We've got to make them connected. We've got to put walking and cycling and sustainable transport at the core of how we design towns and cities.
Jenny, thank you very much. I note that technically we've hit the clock on this, but there's one final question that we were talking about: sustained development, being able to design over time. There is an urgency at the moment with the Active Travel Fund, and I have received a question that I think we can all refer to right now. We can all deal with it as our closing one. We have received a huge backlash from the community over our delivery of Tranche 1 schemes, so much so that we have had to take the temporary measures out. We are receiving feedback that they do not want extra cycle measures. People are not buying into the message about active travel. And with such short deadlines, how do we deliver the active travel measures positively? So I think that's a good big question for us to kick around for a couple minutes before we close this down. So whoever would like to jump into that one.
Yeah, I think the answer there is community engagement is key to that. I think, you know, our expectation is authorities will have done some prioritisation and some community engagement to plan and prioritise their schemes, and so that should come through in the bid. I think in dealing with some of the sort of backlash or bikelash is commonly referred to, I think it's about looking at the outcomes, which is the theme of today's seminar, and saying to people, being very clear what the end result is going to be on the ground, and all the improvements to people's lives that we're setting out. And you know, if there's areas that don't want to benefit from that, then there are plenty of other areas that we know are very keen to do so. So that'd be my response. I'm sure others have got contributions to.
Thank you, Richard. Kate?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think Richard's points are very important, but I also want to add that I think one of the problems with the sort of backlash is that people are very anxious to return to their familiar lives, and this is unfamiliar. And a lot of the pop-up infrastructure is horrifically ugly at the moment, and consisting of large plastic blocks in garish colours. It's confusing to look at and to navigate through, whether you're walking, cycling or driving, and it's very unsettling for people. People have not liked the sort of imposition of stripy tape telling them to go here, there, another way, one-way systems through supermarkets and all the rest of it. It's actually very, very unsettling for people. And so when you combine these other measures on top of that, it's just too much cognitively for people to take in. And this is why the community engagement is really, really important, and try to make it look nice so that it looks like something that they could go with in the longer term, rather than an emergency temporary measure in a crisis. That would be my take as well.
Thank you, Kate. Jenny or Richard?
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Shall I?
No, go Richard. Go Richard.
Okay, thank you. I think both Richard and Kate's points are very valid about community engagement, messaging, as I referred to earlier, and I certainly agree with the unsightly bits, which do confuse people, and they are those things that people don't understand until they start to use them and see the benefits of that. Going forward, I think we go beyond community engagement and we get into business engagement, which some councils have been very, very good at, others have not, where working with businesses, and particularly the largest businesses in each area, we can determine how people are going to return to work, when they're going to return to work, what days they're going, what times they're going, and to actually start to plan travel, active travel and public transport together to make something that's very comprehensive. We've got a golden opportunity at the moment, which we've never had before, but it's that triangulation that we've got between councils and businesses and public transport that needs to be pulled together in the longer term. So I've gone beyond this actual emergency active travel fund, I think, but that's the way that I would answer that. And over to you, Jenny.
Richard. Jenny.
And actually, I would just reiterate the points that have been made. Kate's point on how things look and how things feel. People are there's a lot of anxiety, and when people see schemes, I've seen schemes go up where I wasn't sure whether it was, roadworks or I was pretty certain it was the schemes going up because I've been close to it. But I'm close to it. I'm close to what's going on here. A lot of the residents are thinking there's roadworks there and it's inconvenience, and they have a reaction to that. So we need to think about those aesthetics. And we know that people are more likely to walk and they're more likely to cycle as well if it's safe and it's attractive and it's appealing. We too often just widen the pavement and make it ugly. And people don't want to walk down something like that. They want to walk down something that's attractive. So planter boxes that section off areas, things like that. Get a bit creative with it. The community engagement, really, really important, and the business engagement. And one of the things that we're hearing coming back is one about the sales, but also logistics. So we do see some comments being made about the logistics. How are my deliveries going to get there if I don't have something that can park right outside of my store? So thinking about how you engage the businesses with settling them over what those concerns are and finding out what concerns are and working around through them. The backlash comes when things just appear, and it was understandable, I think, in the first round because things had to happen quickly, and councils, as said, you were responding under incredibly difficult situations to try and widen pavements for social distancing. But we know those pavements have been too narrow for too long, so we do need to do something about this.
Absolutely. Jenny, thank you very much. Kate?
Thank you. I just want to make one final point, picking up on what Richard said as well about engaging with businesses. It's not just the bigger businesses about people sort of getting to and from work, but in specific relation to some of the sort of space reallocation in the smaller centres, it's the small businesses, the small retailers and cafes and all the rest of it. They are very, very anxious. Some of the businesses that have not been allowed to reopen fully yet, for example, beauticians and nail bars and these kind of things that add to the diversity and vitality of the smaller centres. They're very vulnerable and they're very concerned about their future. And there's certainly an example near where I am in Aberdeenshire. In Aberdeen City, there's a street that's had some measures put in, and the small businesses were so anxious about what would happen to their customers, and many of whom are actually sort of mobility constrained in terms of needing to park quite close to or be dropped off quite close to them. They got very upset because nobody had communicated or engaged with them about these measures, and they don't know where the disabled parking is for their customers and things like that. So they immediately just organised and did a petition, and it can be tremendously damaging because they weren't engaged with in the first place and their concerns weren't taken on board. So I would really commend anyone who's trying to apply to the scheme to try and take that into account as soon as possible to win the hearts and minds of the businesses and get them on board.
Thank you very much, Kate. And those are all the comments are obviously very, 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 very pertinent and important right now. But I can see that we're actually well over our time by about 8 or 9 minutes. So I think we need to stop there. There were dozens of questions, and I don't think we've even covered half of them. So we need to work with Landor to be able to answer some of these. Richard Mace, there are a number of specific questions with regard to the applications that we need to make sure that you have, but there are also questions specifically for each one of the other panelists as well. So we're going to stop there. I want to thank Landor Links for putting together this series, and particularly this program. I want to thank Richard and Kate and Richard and Jenny for participating, but also for the other 200 people who are out there today joining us and asking comments and watching and participating today. So we're going to stop there. Thank you very much. And to all the audience out there, we wish you the greatest success with all of your applications and all of the schemes moving forward. and we do look forward to seeing a lot of positive change out there in the street. Thank you very, very much. Have a good day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.